Welcome back, folks. Thank you for tuning in. This is Nikhil, me, myself, help, and I. And today we are going to talk about unhelpful thinking patterns and how they are affecting us on a regular basis. We don't even think we have them, but we do. And this is where we are going to start today's session. So today's session, we will discuss these unhelpful thinking patterns, the cognitive biases, and all that, and how they can help us get away from our ruts. Sometimes we feel stuck. Sometimes we don't even know we have them. And we will discuss all of them and more. So thank you for tuning in, and let's begin. So we tend to trust what happens inside our heads, right? After all, we can't trust our mind. If we can't trust it, what else can we trust? Our mind is a good thing, generally. So it has been pre-wired to alert us about potential dangers, to attract us to potential mates, and also to find appropriate solutions to the problems we find ourselves in. But there are some occasions when we might want to question what our head is telling us. It's not that our mind has a habit of telling lies. It's just that it has developed some unhelpful connections between the day we were born or just before we were born to now, when we started to build those neural connections in our brains. And it can be surprisingly easy to create faulty connections in our thinking. Our brain is a wonderful thing with so many things happening within it. Our brains are naturally predisposed to connect thoughts, ideas, actions, consequences, and whether they are genuinely related or otherwise. It just starts to form patterns from very early on. The tendency we have to make connections where there are none is the basic and the most common problem we encounter. And you can already see this in the things which you do. So like if you find a toast with an irregular shape on it, you start to associate it with people's faces. There's not actually a face there. It's just your mind is creating this for you. So we sometimes assume that because two variables are correlated, the one causes the other. So this is the often talked about causation versus correlation. Correlation does not equal causation. And it's a familiar one to any student of psychology or today's social science or anyone in general. It can be easy to view a coincidence or a complicated relationship and make false assumptions about its meaning. In the same way, it is also easy to connect two thoughts, two events that occur around the same time and when there is no real tie between them. So in social science research, there are many terms for this kind of mistake, including academic jargon and overly complicated phrasing. However, in the context of our thoughts and beliefs, these errors are referred to as cognitive distortions. There are 10 commonly recognized unhelpful thinking styles that people typically indulge in. And all these styles are equal. However, some will naturally be more problematic for you than others, depending on how you use them and depending on what you are trying to accomplish in a conversation or a session with your friend, your family. So as you go through each of these unhelpful thinking patterns, you might recognize some similarities between them. Some of them are very similar in nature, but they will tend to manifest in your life in a slightly different way. The purpose is therefore to identify the patterns and how these patterns of thinking tend to shape and hinder your current perception of reality. So let's begin. Let's dive deeper into all 10 of them. 1. Mental filter. A mental filter is when... So before we begin, just wanted to bring to you two ideas. One is mental filtering. A mental filter is when we are presented with a collection of ideas or experiences which are very in close concession, And our mind filters all these experiences together through one funnel system to come up with a conclusion. This distortion plays a part largely when it comes to negative experiences, which magnify the negative aspects of a past experience and then ultimately trigger an automatic response for our future events. So that's what is a mental filter. And we all have this. The other aspect I want you to understand is deletions. You must agree on the fact that it's very easy to remember our credits and even easier to forget about debts. Our mind are very good at avoiding the useless pains that are caused by uneasy thought. However, deletions happen for a different reason. When it is necessary to concentrate our energy on a particular task, we delete every extra perception to help us focus on what we consider most crucial. Even during non-critical moments of your lives, you delete about 80% of the data, more or less, that reaches your brain and your mind consciously. So I just wanted you to understand these two concepts, mental filtering and deletions, before we dive in deeper into the various unhelpful thinking patterns. Let's begin by closing your eyes for a moment and listen to the noise around you. Maybe the traffic outside, or maybe just your heartbeat or the air entering your nose. Now open your eyes and take a few moments to observe all the details of the room around you. You have most likely noticed, we have to noticed a lot of things. And we may find that we have ignored many details in order not to be overwhelmed by excess of information. So when somebody is anxious, they commonly develop something called tunnel vision, where they focus solely on the aspect of situations and delete any positive aspects. Sometimes the whole picture can be so colored by a single negative detail, for example, focusing on the one person who doesn't like you rather than the other 20 who do. So let's begin. Number 1, generalizing. Based on one instance in the past or present, you assume that in the future, all others will follow a similar pattern. A sense of helplessness often accompanies such overgeneralizations. For example, just because one ex-partner of yours cheated on you, you believe that all men or women are bad. Or you have one of those days when you get into your car and it does not work. You drop a slice of pizza, cheese, side down, and think to yourself, this kind of thing is always happening to me. Nothing ever goes right for me. And then we feel even worse. You get easily angered, triggered, perhaps when in public transport you are delayed by another passenger who cannot find the money to pay for their ticket in front of you. This is typical. Other people are so stupid. And you become tense and angry. Putting things into perspective, how true is that though? Nothing ever goes right for you. Just how true is it? Asking yourself, consider how many other people in the world might also be having car trouble at this exact moment. If you want the details, you can actually check the AA website, which is a wonderful, not AA website for not the Alcohol Anonymous group, but the car company in the UK. You might find similar places where you live. Yeah, there are so many people suffering or having trouble at the same time. So there's a common humanity aspect. Consider that, do you ever judge others? When you judge all people as stupid, including the person who stopped you from getting your bus or train, you make yourself angrier and are less able to effectively deal with these minor mishaps. And I am speaking from experience as well as knowledge here. So this is not just some social psychology theory. This is completely practical and is something which I have been noticing myself doing a lot in the past, but now I catch myself a lot more. So that's one, generalizing. Number two, and no loves for number two, jumping to conclusions. A person who jumps to conclusion, you might know some of them in your life, will often make a negative interpretation or prediction even when there is relatively no evidence supporting their conclusion. This sort of thinking is often based on what we think other people feel towards us. It can show up as mind reading, assuming the thoughts and intentions of others, or also known as fortune telling, anticipating the worst and expecting it as a fact. For example, you're at a party and you don't like your outfit. You decide, everybody is laughing at me, mind reading. Or you say, you're going to take your driver's test and know that you are going to fail. This is another aspect of fortune telling. So these are also other cognitive distortions like jumping to conclusions. So one further example might be you pass your neighbor on the street. She says a quick hi, but doesn't look very pleased to see you or act in a friendly way. You assume that she must be annoyed with you about your dog barking and is making plans to report you to the authorities. However, you'll never know for sure what other person is thinking. So you're wise to challenge your negative assumptions by taking a step back and adopting an objective perspective. We can consider all the evidence that's available to us. Do you have enough information or evidence to conclude that everyone was laughing at you at the party, or that your neighbor is annoyed with you? Is it possible that she was just preoccupied with her own thoughts that day? Number 3, magnification or catastrophizing. This is a wonderful word, often used in different contexts, but in this context, it is taking a fairly minor, comparatively, relatively, event and blowing it out of proportion. Imagining all sorts of disasters resulting from one small event. For example, your new girlfriend declines an invitation to have dinner with your parents. Before giving her chance to explain her reasons, you hang up on her and conclude that this is her way of telling you the relationship is over. But it doesn't end there. Then you go on to imagine her ringing each of her friends and telling them what a mistake she made in dating you. You decide you never go to find another partner and will die old and lonely. So what do we do here? You can nip this thinking in the bud by acknowledging it for what it is. It's simply just thoughts. If you find yourself thinking about worst case scenario, consider the following. Take your objective stance and put things into perspective. Are you sure that for this example, your girlfriend wanted to end the relationship? Or is it possible she had other valid reasons for not agreeing to go to dinner? Maybe consider less terrifying explanations. What other possible reasons could there be for saying no? Weigh up this evidence that you have. Do you have enough information to reach this conclusion? We often take very good care at work to cross-check, examine all of our reports, all of our emails, all of our meetings. We take so much care. So maybe just take a little bit more care in understanding these cognitive distortions. So look for evidence that counteracts the assumption that you made. And I can hear you saying like, Nikhil, this makes sense. Yeah, but it's not for me because I know for sure this is what is happening. Again, that is another cognitive distortion, which is all or nothing. So just to understand this a bit more, magnification or catastrophizing, just be honest with yourself and ask questions to your ask questions to your conscious mind. Ask questions about these thoughts. These thoughts are not true. Number 4, minimization or minimizing. in the opposite way of magnification or catastrophizing, which is taking a fairly minor event, blowing it out of proportion. Minimizing is when we play down our positive attributes. A person who assigns multiple negative labels to themselves tend to promote these definitions before anything positive. And minimization, you can see it all the time, everywhere, including places you visit all the time. You see people in the gym, for example, not very happy, but they are doing far better than 97% of the world's population in terms of physical fitness, just by even coming to the gym. Minimizing makes us susceptible to being abused, mistreated, and taken advantage of, as these behavior against us correlate with how we define and describe ourselves. We devalue ourselves proportionally to how we idolize others. Actually, far worse. We idolize good thing about one person and magnify it to an extent it's not realistic. And then we minimize our own positive attributes to an extent where it's not realistic. So it's easy for many people who have never suffered from low self-esteem to regard those who inappropriately shrink the magnitude of their self-worth with detrimental self-talk as attention-seeking or fishing for compliments. But that is completely not true. And as a life coach, it is my job to be able to identify the difference between these seeking compliments versus those who truly believe what they are saying. To somebody who's empathetic, congruent, low esteem can be seen as clear as the light of day. The challenge, therefore, as a life coach for me, is to give the permission to keep employing the same minimizing and magnifying techniques, but reverse the application and do not feel guilty, arrogant, or ashamed of doing so. This is what we do. This is not something which we consciously do. It comes up. So we have to be very careful when we talk about these distortions. It's not a fault of anyone. And that's something which is very important. So continuing along, our perception of reality is rarely real. And I will say that again. Our perception of reality is rarely real. And cognitive distortions occur when the brain creates faulty connections. So the neural networks, everything you see is a neural network. It's in your brain. And if you want a biology lesson, this is not the right place, but hopefully you will find some biology textbooks and you will understand what neurons do, etc. and how we store things in our brain. So everyone who reads psychology will be familiar with the phrase. Again, we mentioned this: correlation does not mean causation. And that is very such statement applies. It's commonplace to make connections where there is none. And when interpreting life, as most people assume that because two variables are connected, one causes the other. So these distortions are irrational thoughts and beliefs we consciously reinforce over time. And that's the crucial part. We reinforce it over time. And we do this through mental repetition, oral repetition, etc. And it's very effective at provoking or exacerbating symptoms of depressions if propagated over a long period of time. Minimizing is a defense mechanism employed to help the individual through adversity. But its power to generate distorted thinking causes more damage in the long term. Starting a journaling practice in which you take note of only the positive experiences you've had in your day, no matter how minor they seem to you. Practicing gratitude and focusing on building a foundation of self-worth and internal validation will allow you to cease minimalizing your worth and self. Whereas taking a step back from reality, practicing objective questioning and emotional responsibility allows for an empowered and measured reaction to maximization or catastrophization. So, number 5, black or white thinking or all or nothing thinking is an extreme form of thinking that often leads to intense emotions and behaviors. When things are black or white, we are either perfect or we are complete failures. There's no middle ground. And this is such a wonderful realization once you understand black or white thinking, that there is no middle ground. And this is something which we often find very young age parents using this sort of thinking, reinforcing the behavior of the kids on perfection and not perfect. There is only one way you can achieve success. If you don't achieve the success, you are a failure. If you don't get the right grades, you are a failure. And all these kind of things tend to exploit this cognitive distortion further. This doesn't allow for the complexity of most individuals and situations. Unfortunately, we all fall into all or nothing traps all the time and very quickly. Can you relate to the following? You start your new healthy eating diet to lose weight, and you give in to the temptation of chocolate. Black or white thinking might lead you to conclude that you have failed your plan and then proceed to eat the entire box of chocolate. Black and white thinking does not acknowledge that there are usually several shades of gray that exist between black and white. In seeing only two possible sides of or outcomes to something, a person ignores the middle, which is the most common, the more reasonable ground. And I would like to say one of my examples, my own examples of black and white thinking or all or nothing as I was quitting alcohol. There are a few episodes which I've recorded, so if you want to listen to more about my thoughts on alcohol and how it affects us, please do listen to them. In my journey with alcohol, there have been many times where I had to succumb to alcohol, and all of those times with all or nothing thinking previously, I used to consider that as a failure until I started to think of it as a belief system. I started to believe internally or practice the belief that I am a non-drinker. I started to consciously say to myself, write it in my journal, do whatever I can to convert myself to think in that way. And then every time I fell into the traps of alcohol addiction, I would say that I am still a non-drinker. People laugh around me. People were like, oh, how can that be? You're thinking you'll go off the wagon, you'll fall off the wagon. Your alcohol, you will not go, you will not, they were not as supportive as I thought. A lot of them were supportive. Some of them were not supportive, probably because of their own insecurities. But the point I'm trying to make is you will fall off the proverbial wagon. And when you fall off, it's not a fall off. It is just the natural course of progression. Some people fall more times. Some people don't fall that often. It's just an individual thing. So in a state of progression, in the state where you are trying to change things or learn things, learn new ways, there are going to be days where you feel like a failure. And that's just a cognitive distortion. You're not a failure. You are not a failure because you already started trying to change things. That itself, again, is like 90% of the world's population don't do it. So taking that step is okay. Number 6, am I right? 6, is something we call self and social labeling. When we label ourselves, so this is what we put ourselves as, on our behavior in a specific situation. We define ourselves by one specific behavior, usually a negative behavior. A lot of people do that and fail to consider other positive characteristics and actions. For example, how many times have you heard, I am always anxious, even though this is not always the case, or I am not good enough because you failed at something, even though there are many other things that you're good at. Again, you might start to see that some of these cognitive distortions overlap, which is fine. This is like the names of these distortions are not important. It's bringing awareness to them, which is important. So let's think about labeling. For example, you're reading an article in the newspaper about some dangerous thing happening in your city. The article reinforces your belief that you live in a completely dangerous city, which, again, adds to your feeling of anxiety about going out. And this is how this labeling perpetuates whatever it is you are thinking. So the one way is to start to notice these labels. And when we say things like, I'm always this, I'm always that, first of all, that is not true. Secondly, that's something you can change. Number 7, emotional reasoning. Often we depend heavily on our feelings as a guide. This leads us nowhere. For example, we feel angry to our spouse or partner for some reason, and we often think it is the reason that they upset us, or they're making us feel bad, or they are feeling suspicious of us, which is making us feel insecure, whatever. And oftentimes this emotion or feeling is just hunger, is just lack of sleep, is just lack of movement. So when we start to rely heavily on our feelings and emotions as a guide, we have to be very careful. So that's something which we have to catch. So when we feel we respond in a bad way or in a difficult tone, or when we get angry, just notice what is happening. And ask these questions, simple regulatory questions like, have you had enough sleep? Have you been on your phone for like 5 hours straight, where you are completely hooked in dopamine, and now your dopamine is starting to wind down. So like there's only enough dopamine in your system to keep going. And then once the dopamine finishes, you have to reset. So it might be just a regulation. So emotional reasoning, you need to ask a bit more deeper questions. So watch the thoughts as it plays out. Just saying, I'm feeling apprehensive, something must be wrong. Recognize that feelings are often not the best way to measure reality, especially when you are in an emotional state. Consider how you would view the situation if you were feeling calmer. And this happens a lot in my life. Whenever I feel anxious, whenever I feel angry, I sometimes sit on my couch for a few hours doing probably nothing, and then I react badly with my friends and family, and I wonder why. And the same me when I am out and about with my friends, having fun, having great connections, I feel completely fine. And this is what emotional reasoning is. So check to see if there are any concrete evidence that supports your interpretation of your feelings, and check your regulations. So have you done your daily habits, which we will talk about in much detail as we go through these sessions. So the problem with viewing our feelings as facts, which we do all the time, is that we stop looking for contrary information or any additional information at all. We just believe, this is how I feel, I am angry, you made me angry, and that's it. And you need to make me happy now. So we start to depersonalize, which is another way of, another aspect of, or project, another aspect of psychology. We project onto others what we are feeling. So yeah, just checking if there is enough evidence. Number 8, right and wrong. Rigid rule keeping. Oh, this is a good one, because a lot of us fall into this trap. When you have a list of rules about how the world should be, how people should behave, how we should do things, and somebody breaks that rules, you get angry. And if you break the rule, you feel guilty as a result. So people often believe they are trying to motivate themselves with shoulds and shouldn'ts, almost as if they must be punished before they can do anything. For example, I must, I should, you must, you should. Such statements provide insight into the tendency to uphold the thing you expect others and of yourself. So these are standards at times that can be helpful. However, they create unrealistic expectations that you or other people will find it difficult to live up to because it's in your head, and nobody lives in your head. The inflexibility of the demands that you place on yourself, others, and the world around you often means you do not adapt to reality as well as you could. You believe that you must have the approval of your friends and associates. This causes you to feel anxious in various places, in situations, and drives you to try and gain everyone's approval. Why? You think that as you try very hard to consider everything and become kind, in return they really should be just as kind and considerate. Why? They are themselves. They are not going to be you. And however, because your demand is so unrealistic, sadly other people are governed by their own priorities and you often feel let down. And this is the reason why people feel insecure with other people. You believe that you absolutely should never let others down. This feeds our people-pleasing tendencies. This means you rarely put your own needs first. In many areas of life, you don't assert yourself and end up taking on others' ideas and opinions, and you just become other people can just walk all over you. You end up stressed because now you are not living up to your expectations. So this rigid rule keeping is a big one. So just examine your tendencies around what should statements you say, what shouldn't statements, what must statement you should say. Anytime you notice these, just say, why should I? So I should record this podcast. Why should I? I should be having a wonderful experience with this person. Why should I? I must do this. Why must you do this? So asking these questions can be helpful. Adopting flexible preferences about yourself, others, and the world in general is a healthy alternative to inflexible and rigid rule keeping. Rather than making demands on yourself and others, instead pay attention to the language you use. And I am one for maybe replacing some of the words you use. I'm not saying cancel the words. No, we need all the words we can get, because there's very limited words for the number of connections in our brain. So we need to keep all the words we have, but replace it. So words like must, should, need, prefer, want, limit your approval seeking. So just notice them. So like instead of saying I must do this, I prefer doing this. I get to do this. That's a wonderful way of reframing your unhelpful thinking. I get to do this. I want to do this. I am enjoying doing this. I do not enjoy it as much. I sometimes enjoy it. I might need it. And things which are not so rigid. Contemplate the idea that the world doesn't play by your rules. Other people tend to have their own rule books. No matter how much you value kindness and compassion and all the aspects which we talk about, others' life is theirs, and others in your life may not be the same place and may not value it the same way you do. So keep your standards, preferences, and ideals, and ditch the rigid elements. So ditching the rigidity about how you, other people, and the world have to be. You can create your own world, and nobody can, people can say things, but nobody can really destroy it because it's your world. Number 9, finger pointing. I can see you pointing the finger at me already. Blame. It's a dirty word because it implies failure or negligence. It's easy to play the so-called widely used blame game, where we quickly look for scapegoat as opposed to accepting responsibility for our mistakes. Finger pointing, we do it because we are insecure with our relationship with people or with ourselves. We are afraid that when we accept our shortcomings in that situation or mistakes, the people will judge us and people will get rid of us and never speak to us. So we find other people or other things to blame. However, this can escalate and becomes a downward spiral of just destruction. I've seen so many relationships of mine break down because of finger pointing. So it's easy to point the finger at others or circumstances, rather than taking full responsibility for our actions and the way in which we conduct ourselves. This can be destructive not only in our thinking but also in our relationships. Rather than pointing the fingers at others or other events, we can learn not to point fingers at ourselves, but understanding ourselves a bit better. So if there is an example where you are blaming someone else for your current situation, just ask yourself, how true is that? If you are upset with something and you are saying your partner did it, ask yourself, is that the right reason, or is that the right answer? If, for example, you genuinely were hurt by someone, understand that and accept that you are hurt and work on how to resolve it. Working on how to resolve it does not mean you have to take somebody else down with you or take somebody else down. Working on it means, how do I resource myself, to get back up to where I am or where I should be, and how do we prevent it from happening again, and how should we treat this relationship going forward. These are the kind of things you can do with finger pointing and blame game we play. And last but not the least, number 10, personalization. This is when you believe that everything others say or do is some sort of direct personal attack. Also, when you compare yourself to other people and try to determine who is smarter, better looking, etc. We do this all the time. And I can hear you say, no, I don't do it. I know you do it. If you think this way, you may see yourself as responsible for some unhealthy external event that you are not actually responsible for at all. For example, you were late for dinner and caused the host to overcook the meal. If I had just if you just pushed your husband to leave earlier, then this wouldn't have happened. So again, this is a personalizing effect. This is also another example where if you are noticing other people doing similar things and you are comparing their performance to yours in that moment. So this happens again a lot in the gym. I know you, where you are looking at me or I'm looking at someone in the gym and they're doing far greater stuff than me, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I am no good. I am the worst. Oh, how am I going to how am I going to turn up tomorrow? And the other way around also, when you see somebody else just starting a lot of times, and you build this personality of like, wow, this is so amazing, and you tend to discount those early steps you have had to take to get to this place. So personalization is when you believe that everything others say or do is has some sort of direct effect on you. It does not have any effect on you. That other person who in the gym lifting more than you, wonderful person. That other person who is just starting gym, another wonderful person. Just treat them just as they are, wonderful human beings. So, questions for self-reflection. So thank you for listening this far. Hope this is a useful session for you. So these are 2 things you can take away. Which of these destructive thinking patterns can you recognize inside your own thinking? Don't say all. Actually say all. It'll be all. Question number 2. How are these unhelpful thinking patterns negatively impacting your current personal relationships? Maybe just thinking about that. Maybe the relationships. And these are two things. So yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my podcast. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your time. Please like what I'm doing. If it is something which helps you, please share it. Please subscribe. Please do all the stuff in social media to support this channel and to help me bring more coaching tools into daily life. I want to be able to help spread mindfulness and bring it into cultures, communities, and companies as much as possible, because it's a wonderful skill, and that's part of my life coaching. So if you interested in reaching out, please do. All my details are on this on the description, and you can find me on all social networks. And yeah, thank you for listening, and take care. This is Nikhil, and you've just listened to Me, My Self-Help, and I, where I'm making self-help very helpful.